So I want to ask you more about those trips, but maybe a breather for them for a minute, because I have all these sort of boring questions, like, did you use Kickstarter? How did it work? Could you tell me a little bit about your reading life across your life?
Oh, wow.
I mean, maybe you're not much of a reader, but I get the sense that you could be.
Yeah.
And if not that, even just other forms of media. Have there been any big moments, big thoughts, ways of looking at the world that have really hit you upside the head and changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Reading. My earliest... I was a prolific reader when I was a kid. I mean, I read practically anything, and there was a lot of reading material in the house in terms of periodicals. There were medical journals, there were outdoor magazines, there was National Geo, there was Time, Sports Illustrated. There were a lot of periodicals in the house. The medical journals had a strange influence on my look at life, because most articles in the journals dealt with certain pathologies, and the human body was never presented usually in a healthy way. It was abscesses and deformities and surgeries, and so that had an odd a grounding effect, I think.
It's a little precocious.
I know it's influenced me. I'm not quite sure how, but maybe just everything else just looks so healthy compared to the journals. I read. I was encouraged to read some of the classic materials when I was growing up, like a sophomore in high school. Then my interest became, as I went in college, nonfiction became my focus, and a lot of publications out of Sierra Club, and there was a lot of humanist kind of literature coming out. So Human and Animal by René Dubois. A lot of social change kind of reading, for example, like The Greening of America. So I realized that I like reading about my humanness, about humanity in general from a sociological point of view, but also about what makes us human. And I think that was when as I was kind of ditching my inherited faith, religious faith, those anchors. My new anchors were humanism, and studying architecture. I zeroed in on Frank Lloyd Wright because his underlying philosophy was really kind of humanistic and human scale based. And organic, I got introduced to the whole idea of an organic design process, just organic, something that naturally evolves. The whole idea of what's organic and natural evolutions through design. As Frank Lloyd Wright, drawing inspiration from the site or the environment that a building was built in. And my undergraduate degree is in sociology.
I guess, so I've opened the can of worms of your worldview, and then we'll dwell on this for a second, and we'll get back to the river trips, if you don't mind.
No.
I heard someone else recently who I was interviewing use the term humanist, which is out there. I read some, Kurt Vonnegut when I was a young man. I think he identifies as humanist, as influential. Yeah. But I just don't hear that term a lot. But do you use it, or has that term specifically been important to you? Or? And also, would you describe yourself as like an atheist or an agnostic or something else?
Yeah. I go back and forth between atheist and agnostic. Atheist because I do believe that there is no deity, that is managing the universe. Agnostic because I don't think I'm capable of making that absolute call. Not about the deity, but that there is some universal intelligence that is somehow has a singular influence on my life as an individual. And I think the whole argument comes out of the phenomenon of consciousness, awareness. And I do think I can't imagine that it's resolvable. That question, deity, superior being. I mean, we could all. I think it's as plausible when you talk about some deity, our God, our gods. It's as plausible to me to propose that we're just a giant ant farm experiment. When I see other creatures that are not as sentient as us as human beings, struggling to get through a window or a screen and just cannot conceptualize or figure out why they can't do what they intend to do just because they don't have that bigger kind of consciousness or awareness to realize that if they went 2 feet to the right, they could go out a door. Or it's just I identify with that. It's moments like that I sometimes identify with, whatever, a lizard or bug or whatever. That's me slamming myself up against this question, this mystery, and that the mystery is too big for me as a human being, as an individual, to truly resolve. I can't. In fact, as the more we learn about the universe, it seems to get bigger and more expansive and more complex and more mystifying and then someone will raise puts in a different context. There's you put it in the physical context of the Big Bang Theory, and everything from that point on is what we see in this material kind of universe. So there's the notion of pre-Big Bang, when there was nothing, or so that's an endless kind of loop. So for the sake of just being a little pragmatic about keeping myself from beating myself against that window pane or that unsolvable mystery, just somewhere I fall somewhere between an atheist, because that's more of a cultural context. We live in societies that are historically have believed in something supreme, some greater being, be it a monster even, or gods, variety of gods, or a single god, or there's been that's part of our cultural heritage, is to put our life experience, that's the way I'm looking at it, in that kind of context, of there's some greater force out there, higher, whatever you want to call it, a higher power that manipulates or influences or somehow directly is involved in our own personal behaviors and has superimposed a punishment and reward system, and to me that's all very human kind of stuff, that we create, we've conjured up, to make in our sense-making kind of activity. And so I look at it all from, for most part, from a historical perspective, and try to live within it and place myself so that I'm not totally alienated from other people. I mean, I want to get along with other people, but I definitely feel like that my perspective is in a minority. It's a pretty minority kind of view. So, but I feel okay with that. I'm pretty confident about. I've got a brain. It's a good brain. I think of stuff.
Who's that an impression of?
Trump.
Oh, okay.
I wake up in the morning and I got a brain. I don't need to read and I don't need to think.
There's so many quotes I can't keep track of all the ones.
No, go wherever you want to go.
Yeah, we're back. So I was wondering if you think Catholicism might have influenced your interest in, I don't even know what you want to call this interest, environmentalism or something, in terms of its universalism, we are all one flesh type stuff.
Wow. Catholicism as a child for me was more of a social experience. It was church. I associated Catholicism with going to church. I didn't associate Catholicism with a belief system for the most part. I did associate it with a punitive God, I guess, which kind of fit into parenting. Because parenting was from my parents, was a lot of reward and punishment. So it kind of, I don't know, it's hard to differentiate. It just fit. It was part of my childhood experience was, you don't do certain things and you do certain things. And there's an authority, be it parents or be it God, who's directing this kind of stuff. So that wasn't questioned for a long time. I don't know that I can make any association between my experience with Catholicism and my environmentalism.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Like when you're on the river and like the solo trek, you did such a good job of evoking when you were a child, a young man laying in the bottom of that boat floating, Could you talk about what the experience of being on the river by yourself was like? And can you think of any particular moments that might be worth recalling?
Yeah. The river experience was it was 5 days of aloneness on the river. And it was it was like shedding. The process was like shedding layers of that I take for granted that of acculturation. All the concerns and the motivations that come out of living in our contemporary society. Thinking about others, thinking about how you're being perceived, thinking, just social, that all that social stuff we internalize and we use every day to interact and navigate through our everyday lives and who we meet and what we do. And so, even though that wasn't necessarily the intent, was to kind of let that stuff drop away, it just naturally seemed to happen, and I became aware of it, where my thoughts the first maybe day or so were still kind of connected to home, what I was doing, a self-consciousness about what I was doing, the intent of the trip, the questions about whether I'd planned thoroughly, all my ducks in the row in terms of organizing this trip, and the way I was coordinating getting food and water and all that kind of stuff. And then I think it has to do with what happened has to do with the rhythmic part of paddling. Setting up a rhythm that paddling 20 miles a day, that rhythm becomes kind of automatic. That stroke, that constant paddle, stroke, 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 establishing a rhythm. And then I think what happens to me when I get deep, maybe after a couple of days, I think is when it really started happening, deep into that rhythm. And because it was so, the quietness, the disassociation from a whole lot of external stimulation from the modern world, but immersed in the natural world where sounds are softer and less mechanical. I've slipped into what I've described as kind of a meditative state, where my awareness I became aware of my own heart rate, my breathing, my mind kind of, that noise that kind of cleared out of the noise of daily life activity requires, cleared out of my head. And then it all seemed to sync up. The rate at which I was paddling, my breathing rate, the calmness of my mind. It's like everything kind of settled out into this quiet, large, natural space. And that's where I felt, I began to feel like this really profound kind of connection to the river in the natural environment, but also it interestingly threw me back to what I have read about big river expeditions like Lewis and Clark, and thinking of other people who have spent months and years paddling, or where the power of their boat is human power, and how different a time that must have been. That was the pace of life, when before mechanical things. So I started thinking historically too. It wasn't just this Zen, in this really cool, calm, beautiful space, and I really have no responsibilities other than to get myself down this river, and everything got simplified. That's all transitory, I knew that was going to end once I got off the trip, but I enjoyed it, being in that wonderful connected kind of space, and slowing myself, my whole relationship with the world, slowed down to something that I then imagined as being the normal pace of life, maybe a century before, and imagining a whole world like that was kind of an aha moment, where it might take a letter a month to get from halfway across the United States, or a boat, a ship from England. I mean, when things were just under sail, to really haul ass across the Atlantic might take a few weeks, or, how it just really brought to the forward to me on how the Industrial Revolution changed everything, changed the world, still changes the world. So that was kind of an unexpected kind of thought, or aha moment was, wow, this is the way life used to be, or even pre-European America. There were Indians who paddled down the Apalachicola River. When I stated that at one point I'd paddled the river 5 times, and maybe that's more, I thought maybe I've paddled the length of this river more than anyone in history, and I caught myself in modern history. So I qualified it because I'm certain there were, indigenous people who paddled this river many, many times. It was their highway. So it wasn't just some middle class kids, or adults, adventure for 5 days. It was their life, and it was their method of travel, and how easy it would be to be. How I thought at that moment to kind of self-aggrandize and go, oh, put it out there. I paddled this river more than anybody on the planet. And how ridiculous that is. And ethnocentric, So that was one aha moment. Another moment, the only other moment really, well, there were two more. The only other moment was when I was leaving Estefanagla. I couldn't sleep very well. There was a storm coming. And it started to just drizzle slightly, and it was still dark. And I was a little nervous about getting on the river in the dark, because you see trees or things you can navigate around. In the dark you can't. So, and there had been some rain, so there could, the possibility of big debris in the river was kind of. I hadn't seen a whole lot, but there was some. But I decided I didn't want to pack up in the rain, in the pouring rain, so I packed up in the dark, and I loaded my boat, and I decided I'd just paddle to the middle of the river, and then I would just let the current take me until dawn. So I did that. I paddled out to the middle of the river, and it started raining, so I'm in the middle of the river, in the dark, in the rain, and thinking, oh, maybe I just made a big mistake. This might be a big mistake. And I was too far down from the landing, and that Estefanagla, the banks are pretty high. And I thought, well, maybe I could go to Riverbank. Then I decided, no, I'm going to take a few deep breaths and just let the river take me down. So the moment there was a profound kind of letting go of some fear, and whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And it's not too dissimilar than that letting go you have when you get on an airplane and your fate is in someone else's hand. Well, it was a little different in that I'd made that decision to tempt fate, I guess, and just get out there. And I didn't encounter any trees or anything. And right before dawn, or right at dawn, I was coming around a big bend in the river that bent to the west. So the sun was coming up behind me, and it was still kind of drizzling. And right as the sun came over the trees behind me, this gigantic arc of a rainbow, full arc, all the way across the double rainbow, all the way across the river in this mist. And it was just so beautiful, And then there's all these cultural associations with hope and with the rainbow and promises, and I was tired because I hadn't slept well, and I was happy the sun was coming up. So it was just tearful. It was a moment of joy, just absolute, just feeling almost ecstatic and grateful that I'd taken on this experience. Grateful that I decided to go out in the river in the dark, because I wouldn't have had that moment. And it was. But I knew I was getting tired. When I started getting, pretty emotional, I know I'm also getting tired. And then when I knew I was really tired, because I wouldn't sleep well at night, and paddling 20 miles a day, and not having any interaction, except for at Estefanagla, Judy, my wife, brought me some food, and that was nice. But other than that, I saw no one. And so, until I got to Owl Creek. But as I was going up Owl Creek, so this is day 4, and not much sleep. As I turned up Owl Creek, this mullet jumped close to the boat and to my left, and close enough to where I looked it in the eye, and I imagined it was looking at me, but who knows? So I don't know. It just struck me that I had a companion, and I just said out loud, even though I'd gone back in the way, I said, "Do it again!" And the mullet jumped again. Right beside me, and I looked at the mullet again. So, and that was kind of thrilling. It's like, wow, what a coincidence. So I said, "Do it again." And the mullet jumped a third time. And I thought, oh, then I didn't say it again, and it didn't happen again. And I thought, you really need to get get into camp to try and get some sleep because you're talking to mullet now and you're thinking that they're, communicating with you somehow, and it's like I'm getting exhausted. So I get into camp at Owl Creek, and I'm not expecting to see anyone, and it's getting close to sunset, and up the river, it seemed like they were dressed in white, perfectly, and they were clean clothing because I was filthy by then, and were Andy Smith and his wife with bringing wine and food, and they had started out late, so they could only stay with me for a few minutes and then turn around and leave. So there was like this moment of civilization coming to meet me, and it's all clean and shining white and bringing delicious things, and then it disappears again. It's kind of this, almost seems surreal, and so the last big moment was actually after I got into Appalachia. I completed the trip, and Andy met me there. And part of my deal with them was I wanted to stay at the Water Street Hotel, rent a room for me, because I know I'm going to want a shower, hot shower, and a comfortable bed to sleep in, and air conditioning. Because that year, that October, was record heat. My first night on the river that October, the heat index was 110. Really hot. So I was just baked. That was probably why I was getting a little delirious too. It was just the heat was really, I'd start out really early in the morning to beat the heat and paddle, almost kind of sprint for 5 or 6 hours to get to my next campsite. So he picked me up, and we were in the lobby of the Water Street Hotel. And like all of a sudden I wasn't aware of anything else in the lobby. Andy was checking me in and everything. I felt filthy and stinky, but I was standing directly under an air conditioning vent, and this vent was blowing down on me. And it was almost like the moment with the rainbow. It was like, this amazing sense of relief and comfort. And then finally a shower, and then Judy met me and we had dinner, and I met with Dan and Andy, later for dinner, and that was the end of that trip. So those were kind of a collection of moments that vary from kind of almost high spiritual to sublime to kind of crazy delirious, to absolute relief from the mechanical things that I was trying to get away from. This kind of full circle kind of experience. That was all of them. All of those moments were pretty intense and certainly memorable. And I've written about them. But I haven't ever spoken about.
Yeah, I read
all of them.
Your essay in the Waterkeeper.
Yeah, pretty much doesn't hit all of those, but most of them.
Not in as much detail.
Yeah.
Those are great.
Mm. So that made it a special trip. I don't think any of that would have happened if it had been with anybody else. The alone part of it contributed to all those experiences, I think. If not.
Yeah. When you talked about starting to get teary-eyed with the rainbow, it made me think a little bit about gender and sort of, maybe you're policing yourself a little bit, like, I'm a man, I shouldn't cry. I was wondering if you could reflect at all on that.
Yeah. I've always thought of myself as androgynous, when it comes to gender. I mean, even before, we've become so hyper vigilant as a society about gender differences or different genders or the blurring of lines between gender. I've always identified, it seems most easily, with other people I consider to be androgynous. And sometimes it has to do with their physicality, and sometimes it has to do with their the way they present themselves, what they value, what they fear. I grew up with a father who was highly homophobic, to the point of where he actually feared, the way I became aware of his homophobia was he thought because of my, what I considered to be kind of a gentle nature, he interpreted it as being effeminate, and he equated being effeminate with being homosexual for some reason. He thought the whole British Army was a bunch of homosexuals because they lost their... I mean, this is the degree. And it was shocking because he himself had a wonderful bedside manner as a physician, and I modeled a lot of my behavior off of his behavior, not his fears or his thinking, I guess. So crying, I think, is important. I don't cry at the drop of... Well, I can't say that. I cry in odd places. I cry in movies a lot. And they can be the schmaltziest, romantic movies, and I tear up when I see certain animal rescue YouTube videos. Somebody's done something, going out of their way to rescue some poor creature who's struggling. It really moves me. I cry when I'm moved. I cry when I'm sad. I'm not a hysterical crier. I cry. I weep, I guess. I don't bawl. So I can't remember bawling, but just a few times in my life. But I weep freely and easily. Like, what was his name? Boehner. The weeper of the house. So there's it's always right there. It doesn't take much to get me to weep about just something that moves me. So
could you talk at all about anti-modernism too? Obviously you had an experience on the Hickory Hill commune. When you talk about paddling and sort of imagining the indigenous people that did paddle the Apalachicola, which are sort of, similar to thoughts that I have often when I paddle too, the sort of fantasies of imagining this sort of non-modern lifestyle. How that, or, for me having been in the Boy Scouts, there's a lot of primitivism with the archery and maybe at the wilderness camp too, how that might play a role in your life or your worldview, sort of imagining indigenous lifestyles or life ways as an alternative to commercialization and rapid growth and development in Florida, this sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I do think of it as it's on a... I can't imagine... We can't go back to it. I wouldn't want to go back to pre-modern. Mortality rates were high. It was primitive. So, when I talk about having those thoughts about pre-modern culture or societies or experiences, it's just for a tiny little slice of it. Maybe people were so focused on just survival, that they didn't have the luxury of reflection. This is a wonderful moment, and but I do when I think about technology and evolving technology in our culture, I think we're going to have to depend upon our ingenuity to resolve many of the problems that technology has created in the first place. That's where my optimism resides. We can be aware of our plight only because of technologies, like highly aware, and even monitor it only because of technologies like space travel, and Earth observing satellites and instruments that can measure, what's happening on the planet, in real time. And so I have to place my optimism in that ability to observe is what's going to help us at least find our way out of the mess that our more primitive technologies or early technologies have created, and because we're certainly becoming less naive about our impact on the planet, and then I think that's a good thing. It's just, to me, it's kind of a rate of growth problem, whether we can get ahead of it. in time to prevent any major damage. And then, the most cynical part of me says, well, the planet will be fine. Without us, if we end up destroying ourselves or reducing our numbers to being just having minimal influence, whatever the reason, the planet will be fine. It'll recover, and it won't be the same, but it'll be something different, and maybe, I can't say be better off without us, but I do hate seeing species disappear, and it doesn't seem wise. I mean, for the sake of the species too, but I just don't think it's smart, to ignore the obvious to me is that to destroy the planet is to destroy ourselves, and if people don't see that, then there's a disconnect there that's frightening, between themselves and their relationship and how they are of the planet. I do think of us that way, that we're as much of the planet as anything else. We are Earth, we're Earthlings, we're Earth creatures. Yeah, our whole composition is from the Earth, from the planet, and disconnecting from that reality to me is something that has come along with the ability to disassociate, because we can compartmentalize our experiences, and we don't see natural processes in day-to-day life, and just become, not with intention, but just then kind of just become born into a disassociated kind of environment. Don't even touch the soil. Don't see animals being born. Don't see animals dying. Just to disconnect from the cycle of life. To me, there's a downside to that.
Thoughts you described as cynical sometimes about thinking about the planet without us related to the decision to not reproduce?
Oh, no. That started out that was pretty personal. But, we certainly have, that is part of our value system, that we're trying to minimize our impact on the planet as individuals. So,
yeah.
We have solar water, we have an organic garden, we try to minimize our carbon footprint now, but even before it was called a carbon footprint, our whole idea was kind of inspired by a couple of academics from New York, Helen and Scott Nearing, who wrote a book, Living the Good Life. And I think they were with the New York University system, if I remember correctly, and they built a little place up in New York where they would retreat to, where they try to, what they call live the good life, which was kind of reconnecting and simplifying and doing, gardening and living a little more basically, I guess, I call it closer to nature in some ways, but they simplified their living, their life, pulled themselves out of a dense urban environment intentionally with to live what they considered a high quality life. So Scott and Helen Nearing were early influences in terms of my reading. Yeah.
Some anthropologists might say, and I'm not one of them, but that escaping into nature, it's John Moran in Yosemite, or Earl on the river, sort of upper middle class white people like to do this, and
Sure.
What are they really escaping? They're escaping poor people, or in Tallahassee, or escaping the south side of town full of low income black folks. There's an anthropologist who studied environmentalism in Zimbabwe, and
Sure.
It sort of says that, saving the environment in Zimbabwe is something that white Zimbabweans can do to help feel morally good and meaningful without having to engage the complicated,
Sure.
Colonial history of the country.
Yep.
I was wondering how you respond to that.
I don't think I've chosen to to live in a rural setting and as a form of escapism. Well, it is as escapism from a specific group. It's escapism from noise, everything that comes with dense urban environments. It's noise. It's how hyperactive everything is. It's traffic. It's the difficulty of just getting from one place to another. I depend upon that urban environment for, it's where we shop, it's where friends are. And I've always, for myself, I've always thought I don't have a choice almost in terms of where I live because of my early, the imprint on me as a child is mostly quiet, small scale, either natural, very raw natural environments or very small scale community environments. And that has made such a deep imprint that when I've attempted to live in a denser, city environment, I find my thinking gets kind of fragmented. The thinking that the type of state of mind that I enjoy gets fragmented. That I get anxious. I get depressed, and I contribute all of that happens. That all those experience, everything I feel when I'm in a denser environment, just because the imprint of my childhood is so deep that I can't help but hold it up in comparison. And where I go to is where I feel most peaceful and comfortable. Had I grown up in a city, I'm sure I'd be a totally different. It'd be fine. I'd be comfortable. But I'm just not. I can survive in an urban environment, but it's not idyllic to me. And I know at some point one thing we struggle with we talk about as we age is that we are somewhat isolated, and that it'd be hard to enjoy the social services that we might need as we become more dependent on, others, that we might have to move into Tallahassee. So that's distressing to me, but it may be, I've kind of resigned myself to that may happen, and we'll try to manage that the best we can, and maybe we won't even care about noise by that point if we're sick or frail, or maybe that doesn't become so important. But as long as I feel like I can enjoy and appreciate and be independent, I'm going to be in a more rural environment, and I'll make forays into wilder places just to get that deeper connect that I enjoy with a wild place, which is always temporary, and it's not. I know I can't disassociate myself from modern culture and technology, but it helps. It gives me I can look back at it, and it gives me a better perspective of what's going on, and so it's not a flight from any particular group or class, or it's the whole thing. It's urban living is what I try to avoid, and will try to avoid as long as I can. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Welcome.
Let's take a little pause. Could you talk about the GPS tracking I think you had when you paddled the river for the first river trek on your own?
Well, actually, I didn't have GPS tracking.
Oh, okay.
Are you speaking of Portrait of a River?
Maybe I thought I'd read that you had a
right.
GPS tracker on your kayak first time.
Right. Now I know what you're referring to. Actually, it was called a spot tracker, and what it was for was kind of a novelty, because I'm always playing with, as someone who developed online learning programs and stuff. And just watch the maturation of the web and communication systems in general. I just kind of intrigued by certain technologies. And what the spot tracker did that I incorporated into the trip, it was just this little device that I attached that was on my kayak, that pinged a satellite every 15 seconds, and then plotted my location on a website. So it gave anybody, any of the donors, anybody who I wanted to involve, the ability to go see where I was on the river. It was kind of coarse. It wasn't a real refined kind of map, but it gave you a sense of progress, that's all I wanted. I wanted people to see that I was actually doing what I said I was going to do, and I was moving down the river. And then there was one other feature I actually forgot about with the spot tracker, and that was you could pre-edit a message, and then with the spot tracker, you could press a button that would then send that message to a list of email recipients. And the idea, I think, the message I wrote was, and when I used this feature is when I got to my destination for that day. I've arrived safely at my destination was something like that. Just to because this is before cell phone coverage was really, really covered the entire river, which I think it does now. So that was the idea, and part of it too. Actually, there was some cell phone coverage, but I didn't want that immediate connection by cell phone. I didn't want anybody to be able to call me, and I didn't want to call anybody just whenever. So I was happy there were some dead zones, but I also just didn't even want to encourage that kind of communication. I truly wanted to get a sense of being unplugged. So to me, the spot tracker kind of solved that problem, and that I could let people know I was okay by sending that little message, and they could anticipate that when I got to a place safely, they would be made aware of it, which was important. So I used it that way too.
Were you using any social media at that time in your life?
No, I wasn't. Social media just hadn't quite taken off yet. I think back then, Facebook was still maturing, and there was MySpace there was some precursor to Facebook. No, I didn't use. I experimented with it because it was, when I was writing the information science textbook that I did, that was part of my research, was looking at how technologies have impacted a profession, an evolving profession called information architecture. So each new information technology, each new device or each new process, how more, it fed into this the way this new profession was developing to manage information environments and how they were changing, and you had social media became involved, and the internet had an impact, and and it all started off with smoke signals practically, and how that. So the book kind of documents a history of information technologies and how a profession is forming, coming together, organizing itself to be able to capitalize on and understand how to best utilize all of these technologies, all maybe in one dense information environment, like on the web now, where you can go to your personal media, blah blah blah, Anyway, I didn't do much social media back then.
Professional interests must have informed the Portrait of a River project, didn't it?
Yeah, to some degree it did. A major part of what informed the Portrait of the River project was knowing that not everybody wants to get into, is not a paddler, doesn't care to have that kind of, intensive, submersion into a natural environment. Not everybody wants to do that. I still wanted to reach people, though, give them a sense of that river, so a virtual kind of experience. So that's the underlying concept for Portrait of Rivers, because using this little barge, which we named Yokshi, which is Seminole Indian word for turtle, we took it because it's so slow and it was comfortable, and we wanted to take a picture every 30 seconds, through every 20-mile segment of the river. And so that ended up being 5,000 images of the river, which then were edited into a time-lapse YouTube video. So there are two versions of it online, one in which people can do a kind of a quick, I think it's 3-minute trip down the river, time-lapse, and the other one is the full 5,000 images, which takes a few minutes more. And, you know, it's the river's kind of, I can't say nondescript. I know every detail of it practically. I can't remember every detail of it. But I just thought it's for the person who's curious, you know, or somebody who might think they care about the river or want to do something for the river keeper and wonder what the river's all about. That it wouldn't be a complete mystery, that they could actually look at this little video and, you know, kind of see what you can see on the river, which is, you know, a little house. You've had that experience. You know what's on the river. And it's certainly not the same as being there and paddling down the river, but that was the intent, was for people who are not inclined to, for one reason or another, maybe not capable of, can't find the time, would want to, but just they're curious to just get a sense of the river. Because the foundation for the original river keeper trips down the river, the concept that supported all those trips, and River Trek subsequently, was to know the river is to love the river. You know, so the idea was educational, that people come to care and can only care once they get to know the river somewhat, you know, intimately. So even though a virtual trip is not necessarily an intimate experience, it's certainly much more than just hearing someone talk about it or seeing still photographs of the river. It becomes a thing, and it's a complete thing in itself. You know, the river is not just some mysterious place. You see a pretty picture of a tree or a turtle, or, you know, you can, through the virtual experience, you can think of it in its entirety. And to me, that was important.
Where the idea of, you know, it's basically a movie of stills.
Yes, it is.
Where did that idea come from?
Just time-lapse photography. There's been a lot of nature time-lapse photography that...
Where it moves, like, down a river body, or...?
Oh, there are clouds. I mean, you know, we almost take it...
Yeah, but that's different than, like...
Mm-hmm.
I know, I saw you mention, like, sort of Google Maps in one of those interviews, maybe it was WFSU. Because it's not a time-lapse of this sky, it's a time-lapse...
Of the river.
Of the journey.
Well, there's a practical reason for that, too, for time-lapse, is that a real-time video of the river would be 30 hours long, 40 hours long, maybe? Yeah. So that's not practical, and no one would ever sit down unless they were, you know, Andy Warhol, maybe, to watch the whole thing. So there's that practical aspect. It was a way to condense the river, the experience of the river, into something that was people might actually watch. You know, I thought even 15 minutes would be too long. Because the river doesn't offer you that much visual diversity to keep someone, especially someone today, you know, in terms of what they're used to seeing and what they consider engaging and entertaining. I can't imagine that 15 minutes of the river would be any different than 6 minutes, you know, for them, in terms of what they might get out of it.
Had you done paddle-a-thons in the past? Thinking of your fundraising trip, you used that term, paddle-a-thon.
I'd never heard of a paddle-a-thon. I just walk-a-thons. You know, I'd sponsored other people in walk-a-thons, but I'd never...
Like Relay for Life?
Yeah, right, like that kind of stuff. So, I mean, as a fundraising model, it's, you know, it's not... I'd never seen it for a riverbed. Why not? Yeah. I just thought, you know, individuals can connect with family and friends and ask for money and to support them, and to attach it to their effort, you know, to support that, you know, would ultimately benefit the riverkeeper. So it was just a mechanism I thought would work.
And you were involved with the Apalachicola Blue Way? creation?
Well, not directly, no.
Oh, okay.
That was Riverkeeper.
You just linked that on the website.
I decided that having I know the Riverkeeper, having been part of the Riverkeeper has certain limitations in terms of personnel and funding, and that a lot of their money and effort goes towards defending the river. I thought I could contribute my time and develop something that was right in line with what the intent of a Blueway is, which is to get a lot of different stakeholders in the river involved, both private and public, and get everybody, build an awareness about the importance of an environmental asset like the river. So I kind of had an idea that .com, because maybe not myself, but maybe other retailers might work. I haven't promoted it a whole lot. It's mostly still an informational site for paddlers and people interested in paddling the river, and gives them all the details of that the Doug Alderson's office provided and Liz Sparks' office provided about the Blueway. That's part of the Blueway template for the state. When you recognize something as a Blueway, it's a formal kind of recognition, and attached to that is identifying all the amenities and needs that could support anybody who wants to use the river for fishing or for paddling or whatever it may be. So it was kind of, I thought of the AppalachiaBlueway.com as a resource that any of those constituencies or those users and stakeholders could find valuable, but mostly paddlers, because that's my primary interest. But you'll find on the Blueway site, river music. So there's one musician who was involved in a documentary about the river who composed music just for that. So it kind of supports him, supports the Riverkeeper in terms of a linkage back to Riverkeeper. All the GPS coordinates for all the different, multiple points along the river that could be of interest or potential camping spots for people. Links to chambers of commerce for each little river town. Links to, Franklin County tourism, so people can see what events are going on, and just kind of a collection of stuff that's all river related. But mostly, in my head, it was mostly to support paddlers, because I think paddling the river is really a great way to get to know it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. We're reaching the promised land. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you've been influenced at all by bioregionalism, including in our area, like the Between Two Rivers collection that like Sussurelian and stuff put together. And then if you had any comments on North Florida versus South Florida, the differences there, or whether you identify as Southern
Appalachian,
or even just Tallahassee, Gadsden County.
Well, I know Sussurelian, and I have read Between Two Rivers and a collection of work, and the photographer who did photographs for Sue, David, it was the photographer for Portrait of a River. So I see that work, and people like David and Sue. We're all concerned about this, our home, and it encompasses this region for the most part. So we're all activists in our own, doing our own little, trying to bring attention to what we love about this area, and what we choose to focus on maybe is different, and how we choose to get it out to a public is different, but all pretty much, all of the same, coming from the same place in terms of loving and caring this place we live in and wanting to protect it. And so I see us as a community of activists in a way, trying to protect what they love.
And then I'll ask, because for consistency, I've started asking everyone this. I didn't in the beginning. What are your hopes and your concerns for the future of Florida the nation and the planet? It's a pretty big question, so you can take a minute to think. You have to rush into it.
Well, I guess, one global kind of hope is that we, move dramatically towards renewable energy sources. I think, as far as the United States is concerned, I really wish we could realize as a nation this is related to environment and climate change, the connection between beef, the beef industry and its impact on the environment. It's more locally, I just hope we can manage our growth. Doing pretty well, I feel, locally. I just hope we continue to manage our growth in this area, and especially around the mouth of the Appalach. It is still so different from South Florida in terms of the way growth has been managed, and part of that has to do with because so much of that area is in conservation, it can't be touched. But it's also because of the efforts of local people and their land use, land management policies, and I just hate to see what's happened to both coasts of South Florida happen to our beautiful barrier islands, in this part of the coast. Because, for a lot of different reasons, and some of it having to do with access, when things get so densely built up in private properties facing the coast, then reduces access to the public and it becomes more gentrified. And I hope we can manage that better than South Florida did. And I think the recession kind of slowed all that down, but we'll see. But that's what I would hope to see. That's kind of broad brush, going from global to more local. Fracking seems to have to do awful things to the environment from everything I've read and studies I've looked at. And that's all connected to the gas industry, which seems to be a transitional fuel, but boy, I feel like maybe we're paying a price that is much, much heavier than we've realized yet. So I have a lot of concern about fracking. And hopefully the race for cheaper, more widely distributed renewable sources will hopefully that'll pick up. Seems like it might be, but we'll see. That's all, folks.
Thank you, Earl.
You're welcome, John.